So this was the last image about this small intervention that I described you, in which you can see this graphic intervention on the sides of the buildings, and you can see a little bit the final image of the garden when, as soon as the manifesta was beginning, and so the way in which people and visitors could see the garden, the state of the garden during the manifesta exhibition. So, okay, I won't focus too much time still on this very small thing, but I think it's interesting the way. The reason why I proposed you is not only because, okay, we dealt with it during the magazine, during this issue, for a special issue of the magazine that was called Untracked. I'm not going into this, but because dealing with this aspect of, say, this failure utopian component of this season of housing estates, of which the Zen, of course, is a very famous part. I think that this attitude can lead somewhere in a way. We can start from this. It is a starting point to get maybe somewhere. Instead, then say what I think it is important. The reason why I think it is important. And it acquires more importance than it actually has, because it is a very small thing, and the thing that maybe is destined not to stay, not to be there forever, as I said. But the reason why it is important is that it allows us to make a shift in our perception and in considering what is there, the existent, we may call it the existent, as something worthy of attention. So, as I said at the beginning, as much as we took a lot of centuries to understand that our historical fabric were worthy of attention, you know, the process of the protection and of the historical buildings and centers, not only of the monument, but also of the historical fabric. We saw the case of Bologna very fastly, but it has been a very long process. It is interesting to think a little bit about how we should deal with what we inherited from the last century, from the second half of the last century, in terms of built heritage, of housing heritage. For example, recently, a firm, architectural firm, Lacaton and Vassal, has gained an important architectural prize because of their work in the requalification of the built heritage of the last century. Do you know Lacaton and Vassal? Have you ever seen? Maybe you can give a look to them. I think it's interesting. I didn't put it in the lecture because it's too many things, but there are two French architects, Anne Lacaton and Vassal, I don't remember his name. Anyway, they are, I think they won the Pritzker, the last Pritzker prize. I don't know if it's really the last, but maybe the last Pritzker prize. And it's very interesting to see what they do in terms of additions to existing buildings, existing housing estates, especially in the Grand Saint-Saëns, in the region around Paris. Okay, so and in other cities of France, by adding new layers to the existing facade and creating wider spaces for the apartments and for example, the balconies and in between spaces between the interior and the exterior. So working through layers, in addition of a new layer to an existing building, they manage to solve a lot of problems linked to the degradation or the how can we say, standardization of the housing estates, and to which many of the problems linked to this heritage are associated usually. So give a look to the web and give a look to their work in this sense. It's a very good lesson. It's not a landscape kind of lesson, but in a way also it is, because it is a way to enlarge the way in which the buildings themselves and the apartments themselves are dialoguing with the exterior. Okay. So let's go on, and I'm going to propose you another very small intervention that is also linked to a landscape-focused kind of intervention into the Manifesta 12 exhibition in Palermo. This time, we still have, as a point of departure, an existing involuntary megastructure that is the how can I show you? Okay, I don't have an image in which you can see everything, but it is a sort of abusive group of unfinished buildings that have been constructed across a hill facing the Gulf of Mondello. So here, the city of Palermo is over there. This is the Gulf of Mondello. And this is one of the hills that are surrounding the Gulf of Mondello. This is called Monte Gallo, and over one of these valleys, creeks of this hill, and toward the top of this hill, a group of abusive housings has been constructed and then stopped by the public authorities and remained in an unfinished state. Now here, so it is another kind of ruin, a contemporary ruin in a way. So during the months in which Manifesta 12 Palermo was staged, the Belgian collective, another collective of young architects, they're called Rotor, turned one of the skeletons of an unfinished house at the summit of the area of illegal land parceling on the hill called Pizzosella, a preeminent symbol of unauthorized buildings that still awaits a planning solution, into a new point of observation of the urban landscape. In an unprecedented form of pilgrimage that took them along the paths running between the building complex and the nature reserve of Monte Gallo, visitors became the protagonists of a perceptual reversal that transformed the reinforced concrete framework into a monument to the view and opened up a new dimension of landscape in which the city is seen in continuity with the natural scenery of the mountains and the coast. So the operation here is still smaller than in the case of the small garden in the Zen, because the only thing that Rotor has been doing in the ruined house, or in the last ruined house of Pizzosella, is to add these elements of protection to Binocenti, used to protect the openings towards the landscape, in order to transform this skeleton, this ruin of reinforced concrete, into a sort of mechanism for looking at the landscape, a sort of machine to see. Okay, not a machine for living, but a machine for seeing, for observing the landscape. So, for the first time, a little bit like how it happened with the Zen, Pizzosella was not observed with shame from the city as a page to be forgotten of the recent history of the mafiosa management position, mafious management of the territory in Sicily, but as it was reversed. From Pizzosella, you could see an unforeseen and completely new, fresh views of the landscape around Palermo, and of the Zen neighborhood as well, because the Zen neighborhood is here in this valley, this piana that is developing down below the hill of Monte Gallo. So, and this is you can see here from this opening, this frame, the city of Palermo with its dense, compact urban fabric with the main axis, historical axis that is crossing the urban fabric, and this is and that is so much visible from this position. So again, this operation was again dealing not with a structural intervention like the demolition of these houses that has been blocked, and so let's say the houses in this moment are kind of freezed in a condition of suspension because they can't be demolished and they can't be completed because they are still in a process, a very difficult administrative process. And for the first time, this place is seen as a sort of scenery for a contemporary ritual of reappropriation of a piece of landscape. So again, the metaphor of the theater again enters the idea of these small interventions. So something that is staged for a small period, a brief period of time, into the frame of a no-go place, of one of the no-go places of the city. The place is linked to a very dark past, a very dark memory, if you know what I mean. There is a huge tradition of study, academic studies as well, that is heritage studies as well, that is dealing with dark places, dark memories. For example, the places of the wars, of the two world wars, the first and the second one. But also in this case, we can talk about an intervention that deals with this dark memory into the history of a city, and that is still waiting for an urban solution. So it's interesting to, let's say, how this idea of the planetary garden that was at the basis of Manifesta has also encouraged several interventions that was focusing on the landscape, on the existing, on some spots of the city linked to some important or also dark parts of its history, really in landscape terms, because the people and the contemporary rituals consisted in going there, making the path from the bottom of the hill through all these abusive and illegal housing estates and unfinished housing estates, and arrive till the top, till this final stage, final house, ruined house that was in a way identified and chosen to be the final stage for observing the landscape. So every framework you see here, these are also photos by Golova. And again, every framework is framing, the skeleton, the house without walls, is itself part of the landscape that is revealed in photographs. The coincidence of the skeleton with the device for seeing suspends for a moment the ideological and moralistic vision and introduces the possibility of seeing something else, starting a projection. So again, the importance, of course, what the intervention wants to say is not we have to charge with aesthetical meaning the shape of the pizzosella, group of unfinished houses, of course, but that we can change our attitude towards what exists and maybe reverse our way of considering things and try to make something else out of them, try to let's say this is a really conceptual operation. It's something that is at the limit of a conceptual artwork, like Matta Clark would have been able to do when he was alive. Something that changes the nature of an existing abusive skeleton and transforms it into a machine for observing the landscape. That is interesting in order to understand, to change our approach, not in terms of concrete suggestions for design, but in terms of changing our ideas, our ways of looking at things, our dominant way of thinking, you know. So tourists reach the new monument to the view, the last skeleton, which faces southeast and northwest. Men and women walk perilously through the 3 levels of the house, peering out of every window balcony without a parapet. They are curious and enthusiastic as if they were on the terrace of falling water. Okay, so this is all about these 2 little interventions in Manifesta that are more conceptual and dealing with the perception. Now I want to show you a second part of the lecture, in which I want to show you a radical experiment that has been also developed in Sicily in the 60s and that is still alive in a way. That is one of the maybe marginal but more radical experiments in the history of the post-war Italian architecture of the attempt to put together architecture, community, and very strong communitarian input and a very strong landscape setting. So in this intervention, we are in Fiesole, and the author, the architect is Leonardo Ricci, an architect based in Florence and considered one of the representative of the few representatives in Italy of an organicist culture, of architectural culture, dealing and owing a lot to Frank Lloyd Wright, for example, and we can see a lot this approach into these architectures. We are in a very depressed area of Sicily, inner Sicily, agricultural, place characterized by the presence of mines of zolfo, sulfuric mines, so a very depressed site, a place that is considered really to be one of the poorest of the inner area of Sicily, in which the Valdesian community, driven by one of the pastors active in the 60s in the Valdesian community at the national level in Piedmont, especially the basis in Piedmont, that was called Tullio Vinai. Maybe these are details that can interest you or not, but just to explain you a little bit the scenery, the premises of the project, the Valdesian community decided to install a religious community in this very marginal and depressed area of Sicily in order to create this religious community and to help also the local community to develop their individual, to develop their sort of formations, to give them the possibility to have an individual formation of cultural formation of certain standards. Okay, so the community includes an elementary school, a kindergarten, another building that was at the beginning was a mechanical school, so a place where there were instruments in order to develop some handcrafts, local works, etc. And now is a community center. And then there are housings for the people living there, for the volunteers, and for some of for people to be part of the community. These are photos of the realization of the project, the very first years of the project. In this photo, we also see the construction site. See that there are still people working on the roofs, and the photos are black and white. And we are in 61, 62, and 63, more or less, during the construction site. And Leonardo Ricci works directly on the place without executive drawings of a sort, only with drawings that are more or less let's say, indicative drawings that then are developed through the observation of the site, through the work on site with the workers themselves. And And so you can see, let's say, this kind of architecture in the photos of the epoch. You can see, for example, this incredible transparency, incredible continuity between the interiors and the exteriors of the building, thanks to these cantilevered roofs and these wide openings. The buildings are all in local stone, masonry walls made of local stones, and then whitewashed plaster roofs of reinforced concrete. So there is this twofold language, partly using the materials present on the site and partly introducing very modern contemporary techniques. The village of Monte degli Ulivi, Riesi, is the product of a radical experiment launched in the early 60s by the Valdensian community with the Florentine architect Leonardo Ricci. The foundation of a religious and productive community in a situation of extreme marginality, like that of central Sicily, in the middle of a sulfur mining region, gave the project a utopian and the form of the settlement and the style of the architecture tied up with the message of social redemption and emancipation from poverty through development of the individual. The village, made up of a series of buildings in an organic style of architecture scattered within the landscape on the basis of a suburban principle originating in the English nation, let's say, in contrast to the local models of settlement, still maintains today, thanks to the recent interventions of restoration and progressive functional adaptations, its original experimental character, the continuity between its architecture and the landscape, and the vitality of its community spaces. So I would like to show you, let's say, a recent exploration we did in 2018 with the photographer Fausto Gianconi. He's a Sicilian photographer who has been involved in the years of the contestation in the 60s, and so he's been quite very much dealing with the reportage photography. We asked him to go there in the community now in this 2018 in order to see how the community is actually resisting the passage of time. So since its foundation in the 60s, what it has become, how the buildings has, let's say, after the process of restoration, how the buildings are still working and how they are being used, and if the spirit, let's say, of the initial radical libertarian experiment is still alive somehow in the present situation. So he went there, and he was kind of enthusiastic in seeing the lively community life of the village still nowadays. This is the context of the countryside around the city. And now I'm showing you a map in which I show you where the village is located. If you compare it to the city of Riesi. Okay, so this is the village. It's a sort of the name Monte degli Ulivi stems from this hill characterized by an olive trees plantations in which the village is inserted. So all the buildings are inserted in respecting the existing olive trees that in the meanwhile has been, of course, developing quite a lot, changing completely the scenery of the village. This was an initial drawing in which you see this a little bit, there is a little bit of Kisler as well. There is this organic attitude that is similar to that of Michelucci and other Florentine architects that Leonardo Ricci was looking at a lot in those years. If you know, for example, you remember the church on the highway, the Autostrada del Sole by Michelucci. Maybe I showed you in some of the last lectures, the lecture in Italy. Anyway, this was one of the initial sketches for the village, in which you saw this kind of incrustation of organic buildings that were meant to be completely integrated into this hill, and culminating in the top of the hill with this ecclesia, the church, that will be the only building which would never be realized. These are images of the construction site, which, as I said, Leonardo Ricci was actually quite not making executive drawings, but only going there with these sketches and adapting the project on site together with the workers, and submitting the project to a series of adjustments over the course of the work, so in progress adjustments, so that it's very difficult to when you go, say, to the archive and look for the drawings, you will never find a drawing that actually corresponds perfectly to the final buildings, because there have been always these adjustments during the construction site. These are other photos of the 60s by the same photographer who had already been there in the 60s. And you can feel this Wrightian flavor in the architecture, in the use of stone and the reinforced concrete, but also in these huge glass facades that are creating a sort of continuity and making the outside landscape entering the building. So there is this spatiality that is actually, you see it, for example, in the entrances, the spatiality of the buildings that is rooted on the ground and that is creating a sort of continuous landscape that is articulating between the exterior, the open air spaces and the interior spaces of the buildings, in order to recall in a way this idea of libertarian also use of the space. Not only the shape of the architecture in this case is trying to interpret the values of the community. So that's why it is so interesting, this experiment, not only for the quality of its architecture, but also because architecture is the attempt by Leonardo Ricci is to shape its architecture in a way that it's able to interpret the values of the community, the value of being in dialogue with nature, the ideal of being do not having closed walls. There is never a closed wall. The classrooms themselves are not closed, but always open through glass parts that keep every space in continuity with the others. So there are not closings. There are not doors. There are not doors. Okay, there are doors to enter, but there are not, let's say, completely closed spaces, but always fluidity between the spaces and between the interior spaces and the exterior spaces. So there is this idea. Okay, this is the village scene from the basis of the hills, in which you see how the buildings are integrating with this topography. And this is the plan of the village, in which you see that it is actually structured on two axes fundamentally. So the one axis that is northeast, south, west is the axis on which all the main buildings are facing, and that is characterized by the presence of a sort of plaza in the center. And of course, there is this ascensional movement from the bases of the hills toward the top of the hills. And on the top of the hills, in this position, the church would have been built, but it was never actually finished. And you can see how the plans, the morphology, the plans of the building are echoing this organic shape of the hill of the landscape, because they are these ovoidal shapes and these kind of small walls that are continuing the plans outside the glass facades. You see here, for example, these walls that are, in a way, the buildings are willing to continue beyond themselves and to root themselves in the landscape itself. So the other axis, that is this one, that is north-south, coincides with the access road to the village. So it is, you enter from this side, the first building, the library, and then you have this articulation of different paths at different levels, and this and the core of the community that is constituted by the elementary school, the kindergarten, the spaces with the houses for the volunteers in the community. And here there is this mechanical school that now is has become a community center, the place in which, I don't know, readings and presentations and public events are taking place. It's interesting how Leonardo Ricci describes in his autobiographical book this experience in Riesi. He says, for example, the land, this is a quotation by him, the land is augmented by work, however small it may be, that stems from the truth of people's lives and the reality of the architect. Beauty and happiness of life presents a world for those who know how to look that is not at all dull, in no way boring or the product of boredom, like children, people, the whole of nature. So there is this very libertarian, progressive human spirit that characterizes all the intervention, and that is the basis of this, of the spirit of the village. That, as I said, in which the shape of the architecture trying to interpret the reason why it is constructed, the people for whom it is constructed. And the spaces of this is the kindergarten. These are the classrooms, and these are the common spaces outside the classrooms in which you see. This is a glass strip of windows, and this is another glass strip of windows. So there is a continuity also from the classroom themselves. You can always see the exterior from both sides, from all the sides of the classroom. Like, for example, here. So again, he says, why am I happy to work for this village? Because I feel at my ease morally, socially, and as a specialist, because it has been the first time in my life that I've seen a village emerge completely out of a totally real situation, out of a necessity made up of people and things, out of a fundamental effort to bring about not just a mechanical improvement of existence, but also a new approach to community living, a condition that leads as a consequence to a certain kind of architecture. So we have here a very important focus, a very delicate and difficult to grasp concept, that is how can architecture respond to condition of relation, of improving human relations. So Leonardo Ricci is trying to do it, a bit like Giancarlo Beccardo, for example, was trying to do it in the colleges in Urbino. We can. This is a very small thing. Let's say it's a village, so of course its dimension is also easier to be controlled. Anyway, the interesting point is the way in which the architect is trying to answer exactly this question of architecture, how to respond to, how to improve and how to encourage, according to the spirit of the village and the religious community behind it, a relation between the people living in this community, together, to put people together, to improve these relations, to have spaces that are meant for this relation to happen. Of course, sometimes we can think that architecture cannot achieve this goal in itself. But in this case, architecture helps the existing condition, an existing condition, to get, to achieve this goal. Because the existing condition is there. There is a strong community put together, let's say, linked together by an ideal, a religious ideal, and the will to provide service for the local people, a formation service, the kindergarten, the elementary school, the mechanical school, etc. And so there are the premises, the social premises, let's say, in a way, in order for architecture to work in achieving this goal. When there are not social premises, like in the Zen, all the possibility, all the good intentions of the architect in trying to achieve the goal of creating places for the community cannot be successful. So what I want to reflect a little bit upon, and we will also going on this part with Hallprint, dealing with Hallprint in the final part of the final chapter of the lecture, and then we close, is exactly this. Is architecture able to create the conditions of architecture and landscape architecture, of course, able to create the condition for a community to proliferate in a way, to be united, to be supported by its environment.
It's not something new. It's just using the existing situation. It's not something
you can create. I mean, yeah, exactly. It's very difficult to create the conditions in order for this to happen. But it's interesting when architecture, let's say in this case, it is a happy case because it's a very difficult situation, very hard situation because it's marginal, there is few money, there are a lot of threatenings. The local mafia is threatening for a long time the community. So there have been a strong resistance toward all the attempts to make this attempt fail. And the success of the attempt is due to the fact that there is a group of people, an existing community that is tied by very, very strong ties, spiritual in a way ties and cultural ties. And that allows, say, there is an idea. Let's say we can maybe synthesize this everything I'm saying with these few words. There is an idea behind. There is a very strong idea behind. Not only, let's say, a projection by an architect. There is an architect responding to a very strong idea that have basis. So in this case, it's a very lucky condition because there is a very good architect that is actually committed with all himself, all his soul, we can say, all his commitment, etc., and talent and whatever, and the cultural baggage that is much rooted in the Wrightian organicist architecture, committed to create the condition for this communitarian ideal to take place in this village. So there is actually there is a successful condition. In other cases, as you said, it is very difficult to create a condition, and architecture itself alone won't never be able to create this condition. That's why maybe sometimes small landscape interventions like in the Zen can do a little bit more in shaping the change of mind because okay, it's not a structural solution, but it is creating a process. Let's say the ambition of this very small intervention of the Zen is to start a process of reappropriation of the neighborhood by its own inhabitants. So that's the aim. The aim is not, okay, we have a new park for the Zen. We create a new park for the Zen. And that's done, you will have it, and now you take care of it, and we did our work. No, it's, let's start a process that maybe could bring somewhere in terms of feeling of belonging. Let's say, what is necessary for the public spaces to be public spaces is that this sort of feeling of belonging happens in a way. And so that's why the interest of these interventions that can be maybe marginal, very small, maybe pretentious, too ambitious for what they are. But they are starting, they're putting a germ of something, maybe a germ of change that can bring somewhere in a processual vision, no?
Which is like more the sense of the most important part.
Yeah, exactly. The aim of the project is not to create a park and for the park to be there forever, but to create a sense of belonging, to start or to foster a possible creation of a sense of belonging. So it's a small thing, but maybe can bring somewhere. Okay, so these are the photos of Riesi. See, for example, here the volunteers that still nowadays are meeting themselves in the terraces of the houses on the lower part of the village. and also these big terraces that are also the apartments, the private apartments are open to the landscape in a very interesting way. Other images of the classrooms. You see how there is, for example, there is also another interesting thing in the way of teaching that is never conceived with the cathedra, no? The main desk of the teacher and the desk of the scholars, but there is always a more personal relation and also a different physical organization of the classrooms. So, and also the exterior spaces are all.
Can we be here down to the right?
This one?
Yeah. Also, I noticed the panel of the glass. They are trying to show the experience of outside, keeping memory for the kids, like the sense of belonging. All the time they are seeing what is outside.
Of course. They're meant to be to create always this relation, also visual relations. The kids can look outside what is happening, and who is passing outside can see what is happening inside the classrooms. There's always a twofold connection. Everything is conceived in order to be seen from everywhere. Because what is the life of the community, every aspect of the life of the community is the interest of the whole part of the community, the whole community. So it is not only, let's say, okay, the classroom should be closed because there is not a control kind of attitude, but always an open attitude. Yeah, of course, it's interesting what you say. Okay, so this is the articulation of the open spaces, in which this opening and this fluidity of the space is also represented, not only in the interior of the buildings, but the same kind of spatiality is proposed both inside and outside, creating this continuous landscape experience, perceptive experience, always variable, always different. You can you stroll through the inside and the outside of the building, and it is always a very rich sensory experience, because you perceive all the spaces at once, and you always change the perception, your perception of the place. So it's very, very interesting. And especially it's a very rich experience and enriching experience. Okay, so last chapter, because as I said, I want to finish at 1 o'clock, so we have time, is about, we are going a little bit back. No, so if we compare it to the essay, we are not so much back, but this story begins in the 50s. And we go to the United States. So it's a sort of additionary chapter about a very interesting experience of landscape architecture. This guy is Lawrence Holprin, and she is Anna Holprin, as he is his wife, Anna Holprin. Her name is Anna. I forgot to put her name before they married. I would have liked to do it, but I didn't. Sorry. She's a choreographer. She's a famous choreographer, one of the most famous, actually, choreographers of the Bay Area scene, Californian scene in the 60s. And he is one of the most important landscape architects. He's born in New York and moved to California, and was active, especially in California, for through the 50s and 60s and 70s, mostly, and creating some of the most iconic landscapes in the United States. And he also worked a lot in Jerusalem, for example, and in other places in the world, because he's an American Jew. He was son of Jewish parents. He spent also part of his youth in a kibbutz, and his formation was more or less spanning from studies of horticulture and botany until when we met landscape architecture, especially according to the books and to the scholars, through the encounter with the very important book by Tannard. It's called Modern Landscape Architecture. That moved him to decide to undertake landscape studies at Harvard in a period in which in Harvard people like Walter Gropius and other European architects were having a very huge impact on teaching and changing, completely revolutioning completely the methodology of teaching in the United States. So Harvard is, let's say, the place in which many modern, many architects willing to be modern, the strictest sense, like for example Gareth Echo as well, have been studying under Gropius and others in the 40s, at the end of the 40s. So beginning, let's say, yeah, the 40s. I don't remember exactly the year. I guess 43. I think the opening is in Harvard in 1942, 1943, something like that. Anyway, it is during his formation that you get to know the choreographer who would become his wife and work mate for the rest of his life. And this meeting has been very important for, and this collaboration, also working live and work collaboration of the two has been very important for both of them in the development of their work, of their approach. Because in Hallprint, the interesting thing on which I would like to focus a little bit more today is this merging, this meshing between theater, choreography, movement, and landscape architecture. Okay, so Anna influenced a lot Hallprint's practice. He began to work together with Thomas Church, who was an important landscape architect in America, working especially on private houses. So he was a very talented landscape architect, but he soon began to detach a little bit from this practice of working for private clients, creating beautiful and sophisticated gardens for private clients in California, in order, together with Thomas Church and Danelon, in order to go toward a different approach, mainly focused on public spaces and focused on these theatrical potentials of the public spaces in the city, and say as places that can really express the creative potential of communities, collectives, and individuals. So, yeah, we can't really understand the work of Lawrence Hallprint without the contribution of Hannah Hallprint, as well as we can't understand the work of Hannah Hallprint without the contribution of Lawrence, because also Hannah Hallprint, in her choreographic work and her work as a dancer, as a contemporary dancer, she has always been putting space at the center of her interest, giving a very powerful impulse to the notion of contemporary dance and merging the contemporary dance discipline with notions of the environment, notion of space, and relation between the body and the space in choreography. So this is the very famous dance deck that Lawrence built for Hannah in the beginning of the 50s, as soon as they moved to Canfield in Marin County, California, to live, moving from the big city to the countryside. And the beginning, they were kind of isolated with their two daughters in the out of the lively atmosphere of the city, and in a few years, their house in Marin County became a point of encounter of the counterculture of the Bay Area of the Californian scenery of those years. So many artists, choreographers, dancers, and architects has been frequenting and attending the public events that Anna and Lawrence organized in their home. And we can see, say, that the idea of the dance deck is already, say, there is in Nusche some of what would be characterizing the work of Lawrence Halprin in landscape architecture, because it is actually a stage. Okay? It is actually a stage. It is conceived to be a stage because it's only a deck, sort of wooden deck, meant to be the place on which Anna would experiment with dance and can create air shows and air spectacles. So it is a deck, but it is a deck that has, as you see, a shape that is adapting to the existing forest. It is it is englobating. It is working together with the existing trees. So instead of eliminating the trees, it is maintaining the trees in a way that and the shape of the deck, I didn't put the plan, but the shape of the deck, you can see from the photo, it is not regularly conceived as a regular deck, like as a regular stage, like with the platea, with the public facing in a very symmetrical way the deck in which the show is taking place. But there is a more articulated relation between what is happening on the stage and what is happening around the stage. So what the public is actually meant to do. So here you can't see it very well, but the stages are all around in a way that they are kind of questioning and rearranging the typical relation between public and dancers in the traditional stage. And so these are images of the Anna experimentation with dance, contemporary dance, and it more or less 10 years after, in '65. Just to make you understand how scientific the work of Halprin pretended to be in this attempt to manage the relations between space and body, and so the effect that the movement of people can have on the shape of the spaces and on the design process, because which was the idea at the base of Halprin's landscape approach. The idea was that places were never finished if not by the presence of, let's say, places were nothing without the presence of the people. So what completed a space, an open space, a public space, is the people, are the people themselves. The place is incomplete, the project is incomplete without the people. The people are completing the project in a way. So the project should take care and take into consideration the contribution that people would make in shaping its use, the practices of use of any design, any project, of any space. And that's why we tried to create a sort of written codification, much inspired by the codification of dance movements, for the movements of people in space, that was meant to be a fundamental instrument for the design process of any landscape project. So, For example, in these two images, we see drawings by Lawrence Halprin, which are trying to codify or to put on the paper with codes and with signs the score for the choreography of water flow in a fountain. So the movement of water. So the movement of any kind of movement was interesting for him and was the object of his study. And especially, of course, everything was meant to, at the end of the day, to codify the movement of people. So, and in 1965, the system called notation, that comes from movement and notation, is an attempt. Maybe it can seem naive if we consider now, but it is a very say, scientific-based attempt to codify the movement of people in space in order to, because Halprin says, if we don't know how to draw it, if we don't have instruments to draw the movement and to codify the movement, when we design, we can consider the movement. Okay, maybe we can have it in mind, but it's not the same thing as if we had an instrument to codify. As well as if you can draw a tree or a plant or whatever in a plant, you need to be able to draw the movement of people, the possible patterns of movements. And so that was the aim of notation. Okay, so of course, all this came also from, as I said, from Anna's experimentation. Also the experimentations they did work together in the very hot, let's say, climate of the 60s. In the 60s, of course, counterculture was gaining strength, and the idea of a sort of new freedom of the individual in society that, according to the Halprins, were to be driven by the freeing of the body. You know? This went together with all the movement of the Gestalt happening in the counterculture of the 60s in the area. And here you see these workshops, images taken from the workshops they organized in open spaces, just to make you understand how they were dealing a lot with different kinds of spaces and of environments. So also the environmental issue is at the center of their interest, because many times these workshops, these dance workshops, were meant to happen in a natural setting. This is a beach. Many times they were in woods, or maybe sometimes they were in the urban street, in the urban real, out in the streets in the city. They are called experiments in environment, and they are undertaken between the 1966 and 1971, more or less, and they are strengthening a lot their belief in the need to explore in the environment and in the contact with natural elements, the expressive potential of the body. The expressive potential of the body and of the relations between the bodies. So I'm showing you what is considered to be maybe one of the most important public spaces created by and designed by Lawrence Halprin, on the basis of the premises that I tried to synthesize a little bit in this first part. And this is, in particular, the sequence of public spaces that he designed for the city of Portland, in Oregon, in the framework of a huge operation of renewal of the city of Portland, starting from the beginning of the 60s. That you can see in this sketch. You can see this sequence of public spaces constituted by these two plazas, the so-called forecourt auditorium forecourt, a sort of civic plaza characterized by the presence of a monumental fountain, a park, and another plaza with another monumental fountain, linked by paths, arborized paths that you see in the sketch. So we have a real narrative sequence of public spaces unfolding through the very center of the city of Portland. And on the right, we can see the Pettigrew part, that is the central intervention of this sequence, that is characterized by these mounds, you see, and sort of attempt to recreate an atmosphere of wilderness or wild nature into the city. So the idea and the basis of Halprin's intervention was to bring nature, but wild nature, into the city itself. Wild nature, of course, in a tame version, urban tame version, into the core of the metropolitan setting, through this beautiful public park, but especially through its monumental fountains. So let's go to let's focus a little bit on these two other spaces. On one side, the forecourt auditorium, now called the Ira Keller Fountain, and on the other side, the Lovejoy Plaza and Cascade. So the great inspiration is the High Sierra. For him, the High Sierra was actually the inspiration, formal inspiration, and the basis of many sketches and many drawings, study drawings that he did before arriving to the final project, for giving shape to this kind of artificial landscape in the middle of the city of Portland. You see this system of cascades, of platforms, and systems of different cascades at different levels, at different heights, in which Halprin unfolds a real metaphor of what it means as public space, as a theater. In these public spaces, the great utopia, but they are actually very, very lively and very used. So actually, they are places that are working very, very good still nowadays as public spaces. They are always full of people. Let's say I heard a lot. I've seen very many contemporary recent photographs, but I always heard about some of my students who were visiting the places, and that they were confirming the fact that these places are still very much in use and still very much alive. Let's say they haven't been abandoned. They are plenty of life. Anyway, there is this utopian character of trying to create a stage in which the cities, the people living in the city, the inhabitants of Portland are in the same way the actors of the stage, the public on the stage, on the side of the public, and the directors of the pièce as well. So the theater is the best, I guess, metaphor for explaining this space, because it is actually made of different platforms that can be compared to different kind of stages at different levels, but you never know who is looking and who is interpreting the part of the actor, you know. So there is this very, very articulated comprehensive roles, and this active participation of the people with the space. Of course, the presence of water is at the center of this participation, because water, we saw it in the lecture about landscape urbanism a little bit, water is encouraging people to get in touch with the space, to interact with the space. We have So these photos like that, these ones or these ones, in which this idea of the contemporary ritual is very much present, okay, of people involving themselves with the space and with the suggestions that this huge articulation, natural, artificial landscape is giving to be used, to be touched, to be, for example, explored, as it was actually a real landscape. So it calls for exploration. I want to quote a piece from an excerpt from the introduction of a book that Lawrence Holprin, one of the many books that Lawrence Holprin publishes about his works and about, in this case, about cities. It is a book that is called actually Cities, and it's issued in 1963. In which, in the very introduction, it says, the ultimate purpose of a city in our times is to provide a creative environment for people to live in. That is always insisting very much on this aspect of the creative environment. What is a creative environment? How can we be able, as architects, as landscape architects, to design creative environments for the people? What we are really searching for is a creative process, constantly changing sequence where people are the generators, the creative activities are the aim, and the physical elements are the tools. So the physical elements, the physical design of the space is not the purpose. It is the tool in order to be, that should be completed by the people that use it, who use it. So it is nothing without the people who use it. The whole city landscape comes alive through movement as a total environment for the creative process of living. So here he is very clear and didactic. He says that the city landscape comes alive through movement. So without the movement, the city is dead. It's only a void scenery. Theater, say the stage, is nothing without the actors inside doing their show, of course. So it is the actors who give life to the scene, and without the actors, the scene is without life. We call this chapter the choreography of the city because of its implication of movement and participation, movement of people, cars, flying kites, clouds, pigeons, even the change of seasons. So also the movement of given by the changing environment, the changing meteorological situation, the changing of the seasons is part of the great spectacle of the city in this metaphor of the theater, because it is part of this movement. So time is always at the center of space. Time needs to be inflating space with life. A city is a complex series of events. So there is this eventual phenomenological dimension in the city that should be considered in the design process. If an architect in the design process does not consider this processual, eventual, phenomenological condition of the city in public space, any public space won't be functioning. Public space won't be functioning. So this explains you a bit of what he tried to achieve in his project in Portland. Here, of course, we have. This is a photo taken from this book, Cities. And these are other more recent, I think that these photos are photos of the 70s or the 80s, I'm not sure actually, or maybe 80s. This is one of the sketches of the Ira Keller fountain, in which you see this idea of the stage and of the backdrop of the stage, and also this idea of recalling through the shape of this over-design artificial landscape, the idea of the High Sierra. So the idea of the landscape of the High Sierra. There is a sort of camouflage intention in it's not maybe we can't talk about camouflage, but we can talk about a sort of imitative approach toward nature. But of course, the very aim at the center of the thing is to create the conditions for all these event dimension and all these kind of improvisation of the life of the city be happening. So, okay, this is the irregular fountain as well. While, okay, so all the photos are talking about this power of water and the power of these different platforms in encouraging exploration. And the other side, on the other side of this this sequence of public spaces, there is another big square, another big fountain, another big plaza that is called the Lovejoy Plaza. It's considered one of his masterpieces, from 1966, in which again we have this kind of situation in which water is going through different states. It's flowing and then it's standing still in the basins. So there are different, always different states in which the water can be experienced. So in a series of, this is a quotation from Peter Walker and Melanie Simo. It's an essay that I'm going to ask you to read about Holprin. In a series of expressionistic shallow stacks of concrete slabs, the Lovejoy fountain captures the excitement of a mountain stream exploding from rock crevices. So again, the analogy with the natural scenery, crashing in a marvelous carved scene, then spreading and flattening to a serene stillness. This one complex gesture in water and cast stone characterizes and commands the whole plaza, where visitors become part of the spectacle. They can see and be seen from all angles and levels, in singles, couples, groups, and masses. The moment of fusion, when one is aware of being both actor and spectator simultaneously, is exhilarating. So you feel involved in the spectacle of the city. It's a strong, powerful metaphor of public space and urban real. Holprin's interest in movement, process, and continual change in social and psychological context has a counterpart in the continually evolving processes of nature. The interactions of soil, topography, vegetation, sunlight, fog, wind, and other factors. So again, of course, the environmental issues are central. Water, but also vegetation, topography, winds, the changing condition of atmosphere are always considered by Holprin in his writings and in his projects as one of the elements of the project, like Scarpa considered water and light to be one of the elements of the project in the last lecture. But in a completely different way, because much more concentrated on the process than on the final shape. Of course, this is also, you may also tell that these public spaces that I'm showing you are over-designed, are quite designed as public spaces. They're not like informal spaces. They are very formalized. But at the same time, their shape is the effect, we can say, of a process of study, of investigation on the patterns of movement in order to make the most out of the spontaneous patterns of movement. This is another image of the Lovejoy Plaza, the Lovejoy Fountain. Okay, this is a portrait of Holprin in one of his projects as a grown-up architect. Okay, let's see it. About the bibliography, I just included this essay on Holprin. There are a lot of other projects by Holprin commented in the essay. Maybe if you like, you can also focus on the Portland spaces and on the beginning about its formation, and not necessarily learn a lot about the other projects because it's a lot of stuff. And this very, very short, one-page small thing on the Zen by Roberto Cordova. So these are not mandatory. This is even not says just the pages of Lotus on which the photos by Giaccone and some small text commenting the village of Montevideo Olivia are published. and the Pizzostella thing is another one-page small article by Golova, so I asked just to read these two ones. And now I'm open to all questions and doubts. I didn't put the video on, I put it now. I see that there are 9 people in here, and let me open the chat. Okay, so maybe we can make 5 minutes of break just to like go to the bathroom, and then you can bomb me with questions. But maybe it's better to stop the recording because it doesn't need to be recorded.